So, notes of nostalgia. This concert has a really fascinating shape. We start where, frankly, a lot of concerts end, with Brahms's Third Symphony. That's the first piece of the programme. Then, Stephen Hough's Piano Concerto, The World of Yesterday, a piece that was only premiered last year, 2024. Then after the interval, a unique performance of Edward Elgar's Enigma Variations, with an actor narrating Elgar's own descriptions of the friends, collaborators and the people closest to him in his life whom he musically commemorates in each of the Enigma Variations. But first, Brahms's Third Symphony. Now, this is a piece that from the very outset is all about doing many, many things at the same time. So you have what sounds like a heroic fanfare, but already by the second chord, we're in a place of deep harmonic ambiguity. And then there's this apparently joyful theme in the strings, which is heroically in a major key, but then it immediately shades to the minor. So Brahms is already telling us how what feels like a heroic emotion can actually contain so many shadows in it as well. And this is a symphony that, even more than the first two, dares to do that virtually at every point. I mean, that's happening harmonically speaking. It's also happening in terms of, let's say, in thinking of the guiding idea of this program, the nostalgia that Brahms had for his own life, his own past, and his own musical past. There are clear references to Joseph Joachim, to Robert Schumann, to Clara Schumann, even to Richard Wagner here too, music from Wagner's Tannhäuser, that Brahms actually loved very much indeed, by the way. The whole Brahms-Wagner faction, even though the premiere of this symphony almost resulted in duels between the Wagnerites and the Brahmsians, Brahms knew himself that music was a single ocean for everyone to swim in. But the thing about this piece, 4 movements, so an opening allegro, then a supposedly slow movement, then another slow movement in place of what would be a scherzo, and then a finale which is fast and slow and loud and quiet, again, all at the same time. So whatever the personal things in Brahms's life that he might be nostalgic about here, I mentioned the Schumanns who he was so close to, his deep relationship with Robert, and of course his incredibly rich, complex friendship, feelings of love for Clara Schumann. Yeah, that might all be there too. But what's incredible about this symphony is the way that he gives us, to audiences today, to all of us who are listening to this piece, the experience of not a nostalgia that belongs to him, but something that we can all, I think, relate to, which is we don't really have such things as single emotions. If you think about love, if you love something, then you're also aware of what it might be like to lose that. You love something because of the idea that, when it's lost, you have a hole in your life. The other way around too, if you have a feeling of loss, that's also because you have loved. That's to take one emotion. Do that for every human emotion, and Brahms is doing it musically in this piece. It's not only about major and minor, it's about the whole idea of the expectation of what a symphony can be. Now, bear in mind, it's been 6 years since his second symphony, which was a piece that was really successful. It came out much more quickly after the really tortuous genesis of his first symphony that was written in the shadow of Beethoven and had to do so many things for the symphony. So Brahms is less conscious of what he has to do for history here. He's really writing for himself. The way that everything is undercut, like even the second theme of the first movement, in a different time signature, music of intimacy, chamber music like intimacy. Same is true of the slow movement. You start in a place, a kind of simple tune, but then suddenly you're shot through with strange, halting harmonies and gestures that seem to come from another world. The most famous movement of this symphony, in terms of how it's been used in popular culture, is the third movement. It's no surprise, because it's one of Brahms's most unbelievably lyrical tunes. It's in C minor. I haven't got perfect pitch. I might be singing it in the wrong key, but da-da-dee, ya-da-dee, 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 da-da-dee, ya-da-dee, da-da-da. I mean, it's pure ache and songfulness and soulfulness. But it's also a really strange movement, because the third movements of symphonies, as Brahms knew well, I mean, he'd written a couple of them. I mean, okay, in the first and second symphony, they're not quite Beethovenian-like scherzos or japery. I mean, but they have let's say, a more jovial character. This one, Brahms, is writing what sounds really like a a song of lament, as what should be or could be, and is usually the most joyful place in a symphony. So instead of going outwards, the symphony is going in and down and deeper. And then when we get to the finale, the finale of the second symphony also starts with a kind of music that's sort of shadowy quiet, and then you get an explosion. The third symphony repeats that kind of gesture, but it's much darker, much more disturbing. There's a real violence in that first loud tutti that the orchestra have after the quiet shadows again of the opening of the finale. But it's the end of the whole symphony here. Well, look, I'm going to give you the spoiler anyway. Yeah, look, come on, it's a piece that was written in 1883, so you might know what happens. But it's also just to understand the end of this symphony being quiet, being a resolution, which that gesture I described at the start of the first movement, going from major key to a minor key, well, what happens at the very end is Brahms reverses that. But he does it in a way which is the absolute opposite of, let's say, a Beethovenian darkness to light rejoicing. And he does it, it's also the complete opposite of the way, let's say, the first symphony had ended, or indeed the second, the first in particular, which also has a kind of darkness to light thing going on in its finale. This one, we are in a major key. I mean, there is a feeling of an almost a tangible radiance. Something that I think is often missed in Brahms' symphonies is the idea of sensuality, the idea of touch, the sheer way that the orchestra sounds. There's something that it's as visceral, as sensual, as voluptuous as anything that Wagner did. But here it means something quite different. It doesn't mean this grand public heroism. Again, this is a really private address. The resolution we find at the end of Brahms' Third Symphony is more like, it's more like an acceptance. Brahms is saying here, look, all we can do is accept that life is 2, 3, 5, 100 things at the same time. And in that acceptance, there is a deep poetry and something that music can do that so many art forms really have a problem with, I think, or can't do as well as music. Because Brahms, at the end of this symphony, like I said, he's reversing that gesture that went from major to minor at the start of the first movement, and he's doing so much more. So he's referring back in time, so he's creating a past out of a present tense. You could say it's a nostalgia in that way. It's a rewriting. I mean, it's so complex, musically speaking, what's happening. What we feel, though, is this unbelievable radiance and consolation as we get to those F major tremolos and shimmers at the end of this symphony. It's a staggering thing. And that's just the start of this concert. So Stephen Hough's piano concerto, The World of Yesterday. Now, this is a piece in which I think there is a kind of nostalgia, actually. I've been lucky enough to speak to Stephen himself about this concerto, and in a way, he is yearning for a time in which pianists and composers were the same person. What he means by that is that composers were going around the world as pianists, touring their own piano concertos, writing concertos for themselves to play, like Rachmaninoff did, like Prokofiev did, like, as he rightly says, Mozart did. That's why he established himself as a freelance musician in Vienna in the 1780s, and his medium to do that was to show off his skills as a pianist and composer. There's no difference between one and the other. So Stephen writing and premiering last year and playing for us now, his concerto is in a way, it's like a return to that tradition, really important for him. And of course, he is a rare exponent of virtuosity of both kinds, compositionally and pianistically, of course. The title also refers, in a sense, nostalgically to, in a sense, a deeply nostalgic, although and much more than that, book, Stefan Zweig's memoir, The World of Yesterday, which is a unique memoir of Austria, Vienna, of the turn of the century and the early 20th century, all the way through the rise of Hitler and the devastating tragedy that happened to him as a Jewish intellectual in Austria at that time. But Stephen's project here really is in a way is a sort of joyful celebration of what you can do, if you're a composer like Stephen, and if you also happen to have his virtuosic chops. He takes a couple of ideas and spins them out in the most glorious and cavalcade-like way. There's a waltz which takes in a whole series of variations, and it's not just that he's referring to, if you like, the spirits of the musical past, of of Romanticism, of whether it's Russian music or so many things, everything that he can do. He's making all of these idioms his own, and yeah, he's doing something which is not only nostalgic, and it certainly isn't a world of yesterday. It belongs absolutely, in the present tense. Above all, in the moment of this performance, and I come back to it, it is just an absolutely unique thrill. When people say, imagine what it would have been like to be in Vienna to hear Mozart play his piano concertos, or to have been there when Beethoven played his concertos, Rachmaninoff. Well, this is what we're going to have. Aren't we lucky? Stephen Hough playing his own piano concerto. It is a fantastic thrill. Elgar's Enigma variations, really special performance this. I've never heard of it being done this way. So there'll be an actor narrating the descriptions, Elgar's own descriptions of what the variations are about and to whom they are dedicated. The Enigma is, in one sense, real, but there are some enigmatic issues in this music. But really, it's pretty clear what this piece is about. It's about friendship, because each variation is a portrait of a friend or something that happened to a friend, if it's a difficult viola lesson or being chased into a river, or it's just a deep reflection on how much that friendship means to him. Think of the Nimrod variation, which is now used so often as music to accompany public lament. Really, that's a deeply private music of affection for Jaeger, who was Elgar's publisher. Jaeger means hunter in German, becomes Nimrod, so wheels within wheels in terms of how the idea of the hunter is then taken on. And in a way, that music is searching. Those the intervals that it's based on, sevenths, which are always moving. It's a profound bond, that music. It's, because the sevenths are so unsettled, they require each other, they require the next thing, as Elgar required Jaeger, and vice versa in their lives together. The Enigma, though, well, it's partly an enigma of Elgar's own making, and slightly scurrilously, I think. So we hear a tune at the start of this, the theme on which all of the variations are then based. Seems straightforward enough. Although the theme itself is a bit odd, actually. It moves in a kind of strange way. It has a sort of lilting, even a sort of limping quality. Apparently, he discovered it noodling away at the piano one night, and Alice, his wife, said, "Oh, that's good. That's a good tune." No, I said, "What tune? What was that?" Repeated. He said, "Oh yeah, it's not bad, but something might be made of it." Ha ha. Becomes this huge orchestral piece, of course. But he then later said, well, the true theme that underpins this theme, and therefore underpins the whole Enigma variations, is a very well-known theme that he said that anyone knows. That's what he wrote to his friends. He said, this is really straightforward. Anyone will know it. So there have been many candidates put up by musicological sleuths ever since, trying to crack this Enigma code. Auld Lang Syne, Mozart's Prague Symphony, Lutheran hymns, many candidates have been, even God Save the King. But there are many candidates for it. None, I think, get quite to the heart of the matter, because in a sense, whatever Elgar's talking about, and I think by the way, he's riddling us, because he was an amateur cryptographer. He delighted in the fact that a newspaper published a supposedly uncrackable code, which Elgar managed to find the solution to. You can see 6 pages of his workings at his birthplace museum. He was a brilliant, solver of codes, and probably that means, I think, a very good putter out of riddles into the world that were literally insoluble by the rest of history. So whether there is a theme underpinning the whole, the notes that we hear at the start of this piece, in a way, honestly, doesn't matter. We should take at face value the theme we do hear, and the real theme of this piece, which is friendship. Each variation is a loving portrait of his friends, of his family, of his collaborators. But at the very end, is the biggest variation, and you might think, because it's about himself, that's sort of quite self-aggrandizing on Elgar's part. Hard, though, to write a self-portrait about yourself And if you're Elgar and you know what you can do as a composer, not make it come off as a bit sort of showy-offy. It doesn't, because it's this wonderful capstone at the end of the variations. And I have this image of somehow all of his friends being around, and that will be especially true in this performance when we're going to feel the encounter with who these people are through the variations. More, thanks to the narration, we're going to feel that more keenly, I think, than in any other performance, that they're somehow all there, witnessing Elgar do what only he can. A really important piece, this, on the cusp of the 20th century. And just to say too, that I still think that it's bizarre, here we are in 2025, it's still the case that Elgar's reputation is strangely parochial. There's an idea that he represents, and it's probably the fault of that moustache and lots of image making and his own reticence about stuff, maybe. But there's a sort of feeling that it's essentially British, or somehow, or maybe even essentially English. The reason that's a bit in scare quotes is because it narrows the frame of what this music is really about. This piece, in terms of its significance, it was hugely significant for English music, for British music, but it was also massively significant on the international scene. It goes bounding out there onto the international musical scene, because Elgar is writing ultra-modern, late romantic music that's absolutely of its day, of a present tense. Okay, nostalgic, you might say in some sense about these, portraits of friends, okay, but it's absolutely a modern present tense at the start of the 20th century, and that's the force we still feel today. So this is not only national, but an international, musical celebration of friendship. Magic.